Upon entering the dwarf halls, Baridoc's heart swells with pride. Though the loss of Thezek and mauling of the men of Golden Fields are bitter fruit, the dwarves have little time to delay, else allow the current inhabitants of the mountain to organize. Unused to the dark and cramped corridors of the mountain, Edmund the Ox and what men he can scrape together are to threaten the main gates of Deepstone Delve and occupy what forces they can whilst the dwarves move through the mountain. Thezek and the dwarven dead are laid in the catacombs near the postern in preparation for proper ceremony. The grinding of stone announces the awakening of Hanatern Stormborn, a champion of ages past, returned from Torgrim's halls to retake the Silver Mountains. Reinforced by ancient ancestors, Baridoc's dwarves sweep through the labyrinthine corridors in the bowels of the mountain, making their way to the forges, the silver mines, and eventually the city of Deepstone Delve itself. For today's game, I'll be using the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game rules. They work well in tight corridors, and they scale up reasonably well to allow larger forces. One of the big advantages is you get a natural push and pull of the forces as the battle progresses, which I think will work really well with a close quarters shoving match that is a fight within the mountain. So I've essentially got two battles going on here. We've got Baridoc Kingston, who will be pushing forward to secure the forges, and we've got Fulgrim Shieldsplitter, who will be pushing forward to try and secure the silver mines. All of the units will be using custom profiles, so you'll find those in the link below if you want to check them out. And let's get on to the forces. We have 300 points pushing on the forges, a group of Hammerheart Oathsworn and Dwarf Archers from the Stouthearts are led by Baridoc Kingston wielding the Sword of Star Silver. Opposing them are a heavily armed group of fearsome Orc warriors, a brutish troll and some cowardly Goblin archers, all led by an Orc captain. Heading towards the silver mines are 500 points, including Fulgrim Shieldsplitter, Dwarf soldiers and spears from South Pass, Stoutheart archers, and Dwarven revenants, risen from their tombs to aid in the reclamation of their hold, and led by the ancient champion, Hanatern Stormborn. The horde defending the mines include an Orc captain, leading a ragtag group of Orc soldiers and archers, and a Goblin captain, leading a mass of Goblin soldiers, spears, and archers. There's also a troll and a group of giant spiders to contend with. As these will be treated as separate battles, all four forces will have individual breakpoints, and I'll be using a couple of homebrew rules. Spears only support spears, and two-handed weapons suffer no penalty to win the fight, though they do cost a little bit more. So, starting off with initiative, or priority I guess, we'll start with Baridoc heading towards the forges. The dwarves will be black dice, and the goblins will be red dice. That is all kinds of cocked. So it looks like it's going to the dwarves with a 3. And we'll also roll for Fulgrim heading towards the silver mines. Let's try that again. And that will be the goblins with a 5. In the forges, Baridoc and the Oathsworn split to each flank, allowing the Stouthearts to rush forward into position to loose some shots next turn. Get those arrows knocked. The Orcs rush forward to take up position and defend the narrow doorways leading into the forge proper. And the Goblin archers clamber over the barricade in front of them.
Hate dwarves.
Coming from the mines, the giant spiders rush forward ahead as the goblins advance.
Get moving.
The Orc captain bullies his soldiers up the right flank to hold the narrow passages around the ancient offices. and the dwarves advance on the mines.
Steady,
The
lads.
spear dwarves maintaining a close formation,
Keep those shields tight.
while the revenants split up and Fulgrim leads his soldiers towards the officers.
Forward, dwarves of South Pass. This is our lads.
Priority for turn 2, we have the forges going to the goblins, and the mines going to the dwarves this time. The orcs continue to rush forward to hold the doorways on the wings, and the archers set up to loose a volley on the advancing dwarves through the main gate. Baridoc and the Oathsworn continue their advance on the flanks,
Keep those shields up.
while the Stouthearts take cover behind the barricade to shoot back at the goblin archers.
Take what shots you can.
The advance continues towards the mines. The spear dwarves trying to maintain their formation through the
Come on,
obstacles,
Ortig. Keep
and the
up.
Stoutheart archers take up an archery position. Sensing the right flank needs reinforcing, Hanaterm and another revenant break right, while Forgrin and his soldiers continue their approach to the breached walls around the offices.
Go, go, go.
The giant spiders skitter across the hall as the goblins continue to pour from the mines.
Move on, or I'll have your innards.
The orc captain shoves his troops towards the officers, attempting to block the dwarven flank.
Quickly, stop them.
Back in the forges, a hail of arrows strike out towards the approaching dwarves, but in typical goblin fashion, the arrows scatter about harmlessly. The Stouthearts shoot back. Most arrows strike obstacles in the way, but one sharpshooter weaves an arrow over the barricade, through the doorway, and into the throat of the orc warrior guarding it.
Got the bastard.
In the mines, the Stoutheart archers loose arrows over the crates and towards the giant spiders, but the shots are hurried and wide. The goblin archers loose a scattering of arrows back, to no effect, and one of the orc archers looses an arrow that buries itself deep in the shield of one of the spear dwarves.
Shields up, Oathsworn. Push forward.
Alright, priority on the forge side goes to the dwarves with a 6, and on the mines side it'll go to the goblins with a 4 because the dwarves had it last time. The Oathsworn seize the initiative, and one dwarf soldier rushes into the doorway before the orcs can replace the fallen defender. The rest of the Oathsworn rush up, with a large group making a move towards the main forge entrance. The Stouthearts advance to get into a more effective range. Orcs in the forge leap into combat to regain the lower doorway,
Stop them.
otherwise maintaining the advantage of defensive positions. The giant spiders bolt forward using their superior mobility, able to crawl over anything in their path.
Cock feather, quick.
They tie up the Stoutheart archers and threaten the spear dwarf flank, buying time for the goblins to form up. The archers move forward, knocking arrows, as the goblins advance and begin to organise.
Hands of spear.
The orcs continue their race to the breach, blocking the dwarf advance and moving into the offices. The spear dwarfs hold position while the spider threat is dealt with. Dwarf revenants take advantage of the pause to move towards the right flank, while Hanaterm and unengaged Stouthearts fall upon the spiders, blades drawn. On the dwarf left flank, Fulgrim leaps towards the breach, now blocked by an
you're
orc
asking
soldier.
for it.
The revenants and dwarf warriors push into the offices and back up Fulgrim.
You've got him for here. Cut him down.
Two of the Stoutheart archers lob arrows towards the goblins behind the barricade, but their shots are high. The goblin archers shoot back. The first shot splinters mail and buries the arrow deep in the guts of the two-handed hammer-wielding Oathsworn. An arrow deflects off an Oathsworn helmet in the next volley. And the third volley drives two arrows over the crate and into Baridoc's raised shield. The orcs in the silver mines are up next. They loose a volley towards the spear dwarves. Two arrows strike shields and the others go wide. The goblins follow that up with another 3 goblin volley from their left, One arrow strikes male but fails to penetrate, while the others go wide. The spiders have disrupted the stout hearts in the mines, so there are no return shots. Over at the forges, an orc warrior attempts to drive one of the Oathsworn back out of the doorway. We're looking for the highest number on the dice, and the dwarf wins with a 6. The orc is forced back 1 inch, and the dwarf attempts to wound the orc, but fails, needing 6s to defeat the orc's heavy armour and shield. Over in the silver mines, the giant spiders leap upon the dwarves. The first spider causes a stout heart to stumble back and sink to his knees as poison courses through his body. Hanaturm drives the spider back with his shield, then cleaves it with his axe, bursting it and the crate beneath it. The third spider is set upon by 2 dwarves and a revenant, who overwhelm it and spit the spider on their swords. The spear dwarves pivot on the spot, and 4 of them drive the spider back before piercing its bloated body. On the dwarf left flank, Forgrin leaps into the breach, the orc soldier attempting to hold him off with its shield. The contest is even, but Forgrin's superior axe skill gains him an advantage. He hooks the orc's shield out of the way with his axe and then thrusts it towards the orc's face, but the strike is felled by the crumbling walls of the breach, and his axe glances off the orc's helmet. With a final shove of his shield, the orc pushes Forgrin back. Turn 4 priority. Let's start with the forge side. It'll be going to the orcs with a 4, and on the silver mines, it'll be going to the dwarves with a 5. In the forges, the orcs will charge back into the doorway to try and retake it. Otherwise, it's just a case of holding.
Worthless scum!
The dwarves continue to push up. A couple head towards the second doorway, while the main thrust rushes the gateway. The Stouthearts manoeuvre into a position to shoot past the Oathsworn advance. The spear dwarves in the mines march forward and take up position behind the barricade in the centre of the cavern. Hanaturm steps up to the remaining spider, while the revenants spread out on the flank. The Stoutheart archers were well disrupted, and so spread out along the back line to take what opportunities they can. Forgrin leaps back into the fray, while the revenants and the officers make a push on the orc captain. The goblins advance slowly, broadening their spear line to envelop the dwarves, and the goblin soldiers move up to protect the flank. One of the orcs in the office moves to help the captain.
I've got this one, Captain.
The goblin archers in the forge loose 2 volleys at the advancing dwarves. The first results in 1 arrow hitting a dwarf's shield, while the second volley peppers the unfortunate Oathsworn, 2 arrows striking his shield, but the third sneaks underneath and shatters his shin, dropping him screaming to the floor.
Ah!
The Stouthearts send 2 volleys in reply. The first arrows shatter on the archway, with 1 clipping the goblin's arm, but causing little harm. The second volley clatters uselessly off the walls and barricades. The orcs in the mines lose a volley at the South Pass spear dwarves. 2 bury themselves in the dwarves' shields, but they remain unshaken. Back in the forges, the struggle for the doorways on the wings continues. At the bottom door, the defending Oathsworn beats back the attacking orc, but fails to put him down.
Ah, get off, you brute!
While up top, the orc's furious defence is too much for the Oathsworn to dislodge. In the mines, Hanaturm drives back, and then finishes off the remaining giant spider. The Revenant linebreaker in the officers lashes out with his axe. The orc captain and his fellow taken aback by its ghastly visage.
What is that thing?
The axe strikes the captain in the chest, cracking ribs beneath his armour and leaving him gasping for breath. Fate is not on his side today. Forgrin renews his assault on the breach, the orc defending to the best of his ability. Again, it's an even exchange, but Forgrin's experience shows and he forces an opening. Alas, his axe is fouled by the breach once more,
Blasted thing!
and the orc shoves him back. At the end of the turn, 2 lines are forming up in the silver mines, neither side quite willing to commit to the press just yet, and skirmishing continues around the offices. In the forge, the side doors are proving to be a sticking point for both sides. The goblin archers are beginning to reap a toll, and casualties the dwarves can ill afford are mounting up.
Come on, man. I'm looking forward to this.
Stab him!
Let's make a roll for initiative, starting with the Forge side. The initiative goes to the Orcs and Goblins with a 5, and on the Silvermine side, it goes to the Dwarves with a 6. In the Forges, the fight to retake the lower doorway continues, and the Goblin archers fall back from the archway.
We won't go
The
out
Troll
there.
and an Orc warrior move forward to take up their positions.
Close the doorway, scum!
The banner bearer falls back to where he can support the models blocking the archway. The dwarves push forward, and Oathsworn continues to try and break through the upper doorway, while Baridoc leads his group through the archway.
Stormpeak!
With friendly models in the way, the Stoutheart archers run forward to support the push up the middle.
Stormpeak! Get into it, lads!
In the mines, the dwarves and revenants let out a cry
Kill the bastards!
and surge forward into the goblin lines. The Stoutheart archers and Hanaterm move up to fill any holes that may appear in the dwarf lines. Forgrim continues his assault on the breach, and the revenants continue to fight through the officers. Some of the dwarf soldiers head around to the front line, concerned about the time taken for the breach to fall.
Let's let Forgrim play.
One of the orc soldiers clambers over the fallen rubble to get behind the revenants, but the unstable rock makes his move difficult. Keen for blood, an orc archer rushes forward to hack at the spear dwarves,
Useless bow!
and the goblins at the rear spread out to give the front lines room to fight. The troll lumbers up, and the goblin soldiers carry their banner forward. There's no shooting, so straight into the fight for the bottom doorway. The orc warrior comes out strong, swinging a mighty blow under the lintel that's deflected by the dwarf's helmet, but causes him to stumble back. At the top doorway, the orc warrior batters aside the Oathsworn's attack and strikes over the dwarf's shield, sinking his cleaver into the Oathsworn's neck. He contemptuously shoves the body out of the way. Baridoc lunges through the archway, sword of star silver leading. The orc warrior tries to deflect the blade, heartened by the sight of the orcish banner, but Baridoc's point effortlessly pierces his breast before cutting to the side, shearing through his armour like it's not even there. The troll chuckles as the Oathsworn rushes towards him, shield held high, and flicks his long claws out to gut the dwarf. But with a burst of speed, the dwarf runs inside the troll's reach and drives his shield into the troll's bulbous nose, momentarily stunning it and causing it to stumble back a step, opening the way into the forges. In the silver mines, the orc soldier blocks the breach like an absolute champ, and again only Forgrim's experience gives him any advantage. With a shove, he unbalances the orc before laying a boot into its knee, dropping the orc to the hard floor. Forgrim slams his axe down and steps through the breach, eyeing up the next in line.
Sorry I'm late. Who's
In the
first?
officers, the revenant's furious assault cuts down one orc, while the orc captain overcomes his shock and crumples the dried husk before him.
Stay dead!
The shoving match in the mines begins. The goblins push hard on the dwarf right flank and centre,
Wants his fingers!
while the spear dwarves on the left remain firm, their spear thrusts cutting a bloody mess through the goblin ranks. 3 dwarves and revenants fall, but 7 orcs and goblins are cut down in return. Here's the board at the end of the turn. The fight for the mines is getting messy. I love the way these rules result in your front line becoming a tangled mess, where you can redress your ranks or push into gaps in your enemies. The dwarves have finally made progress on the far left, and in the forges, the dwarves have a chance of breaking through into the forges proper. Priority on the forge side is going to the orcs, and on the Silvermine side it'll be going to the orcs as well. This is a fairly important movement phase for both sides, so Baridoc is going to use a might point to call a heroic move, and the orc captain will be doing the same to counter him. To determine who gets to go first, we'll do a roll-off, with Baridoc winning 4-2, so Baridoc and any dwarves within 6 inches of him will move before the orcs get to act.
Don't let up now!
Stop
Move
it!
An Oathsworn rushes at the troll, and Baridoc makes a beeline for the orc captain. Those dwarves close to Baridoc heed his call and rush the archway with him.
Torgrim!
The orcs pile in
Kill them!
and pull back some forces from the side passages to reinforce the main entrance. Those dwarves remaining attempt to force the doorways or rush up to support the archway. In the mines, the orcs and goblins surge forward, pinning the spear dwarf formation in place and attempting to take advantage of the bulge in the dwarf right.
We're running! We're running!
The goblin centre opens up and the troll slams into the front lines. The remaining goblins form up, ready to reinforce where needed. The orc captain and the officers urges his soldiers on, and they pile into those who have made it through to their side of the wall.
You're mine!
The dwarves, on the back foot,
Hold them back!
rush the Stoutheart archers in to push back on the right, and the reinforcements from the left run as fast as their wee little legs will carry them. 2 goblin archers loose arrows at the Oathsworn banner bearer. They both strike true, but fail to penetrate the dwarven male. The remaining 4 archers loose panic shots towards the Oathsworn who rushed into the forges, but all 4 arrows go wide. Angered by dwarven tricks, the troll slaps the Oathsworn shielding in front of him, crumpling him into the flagstones. Baridoc launches himself at the orc captain, but the orc warrior beside him pins him with its shield. A glance at the banner behind him isn't enough to spur Baridoc on, so he digs deep within himself and throws the orc warrior off him with a mighty roar, slashing towards the captain with his sword. His slash scores a deep groove through the armour on the captain's abdomen, but fails to cause any real damage. The fights for the doorways continue, the defending orcs managing to keep the dwarves at bay. In the mines, the troll crushes the dwarf in front of him, and the 2 sides continue their clash. The goblins fight furiously on the dwarven right, pushing them back and opening the lines wide, while the dwarves maintain their advantage on the left, barely. 1 dwarf and 1 revenant fall, and only 1 goblin is cut down in return. In the officers, the revenant defending the breach forces back the attacking orc, while the revenant in the room drives back the wounded orc captain, but cannot land a killing blow. Thorgrin is hard pressed in the breach, the 2 orc soldiers forcing him back a step, but the encouragement of the ancient banner behind him and his own well of might give him a surge of strength.
All right then.
He shoves both orcs back, cleaving the first unshielded orc, though his blow is deflected by the shield of the second. Well, it was a rather tame turn, only about 6 models removed. The dwarves definitely had the worst of it. Baridoc and the Oathsworn are really struggling in the forges. They are getting very much out-traded thus far. The dwarves in the mine need to reform before they are overwhelmed by the goblins' numbers.
Get in here!
Kill them!
Go, Oathsworn!
Next turn's priority. The forge goes to the dwarves, and the silver mines goes to the goblins. Over in the forges, it's another pretty critical juncture for both sides. So the orc captain will be using his final point of might to call a heroic move. And Baridoc will be countering with his final point of might to keep that beachhead open. Once again, it's down to a roll-off. And the dwarves get it with a 4 versus 3.
Quickly, get in here!
That's very, very lucky. So Baridoc starts by moving into combat with the captain. That cancels his heroic move, so all of the dwarves get to act now. Everybody rushes in.
Forward, Baridoc!
1 goblin vaults over the barricade to threaten the Stoutheart archer, and the other goblin archers consolidate and knock arrows. The orc and goblins continue their rampage on the silver mine side of the table, piling on to the scattered dwarves.
Kill them! Kill them!
And the orcs around the officers pin the dwarves and revenants into place.
Hold them here!
The main body of dwarves is pretty well tied up, so the Stouthearts on the bottom give their fellows some room to fight, and the reinforcements move in. Back in the forges, the goblin archers throw a volley towards the dwarves pouring through the archway, and one of the stout hearts falls.
Aha!
Baridoc renews his assault on the orc captain, both sides taking heart from their banners, but Baridoc's skill at arms takes the day.
Come here, you overgrown
The orc backs away, barely keeping out of Baridoc's reach, as the sword of Star Silver lops off the corner of his
You
shield.
slippery bastard.
The troll clobbers the foolish Stoutheart in front of him, and the remaining Stoutheart within the forges is knifed in the back by a goblin archer.
Stabbing.
On the wings, the orcs once again beat back the Oathsworn. The dwarves are struggling to gain any momentum. In the silver mines, the goblins continue their push through the dwarven right, and the spear dwarves on the left begin to lose ground under the relentless goblin assault.
Those shields locked.
The orc captain and his mate and the officers slam the revenant linebreaker into the wall behind it and furiously pummel it with fist and sword hilt, but the desiccated, unfeeling remains are oblivious to their attack.
Moving.
The revenant and orc in the office breach trade blows, with neither gaining an advantage, while Thorgrin maintains his furious onslaught and cuts down another orc soldier.
And another one.
At the end of the turn, the casualties are starting to mount for the goblins in the silver mines. The dwarves just have to endure, though their formation is smashed to pieces and scattered models are easy for the tide of goblins to pick off. The fight in the officers is a bit of a stalemate, though the dwarves are slowly clawing out an advantage. In the forges, the dwarves are getting crushed. So far, they've killed 2 orcs, but suffered 7 casualties in return. It's not looking good for Baridoc.
Hold firm.
Stab.
Let's roll initiative for the forges. It's going to the dwarves with a 3, and for the silver mines, it's going to the dwarves with a 4 because the orcs and goblins had it last time. Baridoc continues to attack the orc captain, trying to cut the head from the snake. Another Stoutheart sacrifices himself to the troll to buy time for the rest of the dwarves, and the other dwarves pile in. The orc warriors push back on the dwarven beachhead, hoping to press them back out of the forges.
Cut them down.
The dwarven lines in the silver mines are in absolute disarray, so the goblin captain calls a heroic move to continue to take advantage of it. Hanaterm calls one in response to reform the dwarf lines. With the roll-off, it goes to the goblins.
Push
The
harder.
main body of goblins surges forward at their captain's command, pressing into the ragged dwarves before they can react. Those dwarves who are free throw themselves into the gaps, attempting to contain the rampaging goblins. As the orcish momentum ebbs in the officers, Thorgrin pushes out of the breach, making room for more soldiers to follow him through. The remaining orc soldier charges in, desperate to hold the dwarves back. The remaining goblins, who did not heed their captain's call, now move up to reinforce the line. With customary courage, the goblin archers loose a ragged volley at the Stoutheart archer battling their mate. Most shots go wide, but one sails over the small goblin's head and glances off the dwarf's mail. Baridoc slashes out at the orc captain, but despite the encouragement of the banner behind him, the addition of another orc warrior forces him back. The orc captain, sensing weakness, aims 2 mighty chops towards Baridoc, who turns them aside with his shield. The orc warrior strikes Baridoc from the side, his cleaver bruising the dwarf prince, but Baridoc's fine armour prevents any lasting damage. Sensing their prince in trouble, the nearby Oathsworn redouble their efforts. One beats back 2 orc warriors and shatters a knee with his hammer. The other drops a goblin archer with his axe. The Stouthearts too fall upon the enemies in a frenzy. One forces back a goblin archer, the other momentarily frightens the troll and orc warrior with a string of foul dwarven expletives. What a champ. The struggle in the doorways of the wings continues unchangingly. The dwarves in the mine begin to turn the fight on the right flank, halting the goblin momentum at last.
That's it, Beards.
The spear dwarves on the left dig their heels in, obstinately driving the goblins back.
They're still running.
The skirmish in the offices continues. The hole in the wall is well defended, but the orc captain and soldier destroy the ancient dwarf hero with a rain of hacking cuts from their cleavers.
Just die.
Thorgrim falls upon the orc soldier in front of him, who is desperately trying to block the attacks of the bellowing dwarf.
Your turn.
But Thorgrim's fury is too much and he brutalises the creature before him. Shocked by Thorgrim's roaring, the remaining orc soldier is no match for the South Pass soldier, who drops it with a blow from his axe, clearing the way for the dwarves to fall upon the goblin rear.
Thorgrim, what's the hold up?
That scrap was brutal. The orcs and goblins lost 7 models this round, which well and truly shifts the battle into the dwarves' favour. In the forges, the dwarves managed to cut down 2 models without losing any in return. Perhaps this is the turn of the tide there as well. Let's roll for priority. In the forges, it goes to the orcs, and in the mines, it goes to the dwarves. After striking the dwarf prince, the orc warrior presses his attack on Baridoc, while the captain catches his breath and takes stock of the situation.
Busy.
The troll lashes out, gangly arms wide to occupy 2 Stoutheart archers,
Mine.
while most orcs and goblins hold back, content to let the troll squash the heavily armoured dwarves, or happy to pepper targets with arrows without exposing themselves to danger. The dwarves in the forges proper are pinned in place, and those dwarves on the wings continue to tie up the orcs in the doorways. Deciding those dwarves will never get through, the last dwarf in the entry hall begins to move towards the archway. Within the mines, the dwarf ranks are beginning to stabilise, but now the goblins are looking ragged and exposed. So the goblin captain declares a heroic move, which Hanaturm will counter. With a roll-off, they're even. Okay, try again. And Hanaturm is quicker off the mark, urging the dwarves to fall upon the goblins while they're recovering from the slaughter a moment before.
Lads, get stuck in.
The dwarves surge forward, finally on the offence. One spear dwarf's courage fails him at the sight of the troll, but another is quick to press forward in his place. The goblins countercharge at their captain's call, plugging what holes they can to stem the dwarf advance. Over by the wall breach, the dwarves exploit the gap they have created. One soldier rushes over and blocks the orcs inside the offices, while Thorgrim leads a group around the structure towards the goblin
Now's
rear.
our chance. Follow me.
Seeing his escape cut off, the orc captain assaults the dwarf in the doorway, while his soldiers press on the revenant once more. The orc archers turn at the sound of heavy dwarf boots and scatter to line up targets for their arrows. 4 goblin archers loose a volley towards the Oathsworn fighting the goblin. They may hit their friend, but it's a sacrifice they're willing to make. They all miss. Perhaps they're a little bit sentimental after all. The troll reaches out to grasp the Stoutheart archers before it, but the archers manage to fend it off with fast strikes from their short swords. The troll warily backs away, avoiding anything more than superficial wounds. The orc warrior fighting Baridoc presses him with its shield, just seeking to tie the dwarf prince up, and it succeeds, forcing Baridoc to give ground, along with the Oathsworn beside him. The final Oathsworn in the room turns and cuts down the goblin archer sneaking up behind him.
You weasel.
The fight in the lower doorway has a sudden turn as the orc warrior lands a stunning blow to the Oathsworn's helmet, laying him out flat. The struggle in the top doorway continues, the dwarf landing a good strike on the orc, but failing to penetrate the orc's heavy armour. In the mines, Hanaturm leaps into the fray, cutting down the banner bearer with his ancient axe, but before the banner can fall, it's snatched up by the nearby spear goblin. The dwarves lay into the scattered goblins, hewing through their ranks in a fury. The troll holds its ground, gobbling up the foolhardy dwarf, prodding it with his spear, and the remaining spear dwarves continue their relentless advance.
That's it. Stick together.
The orc archers loose when they see Thorgrim around the corner. One arrow strikes the column, and the other skips off Thorgrim's mail halberd. The revenant holds the office breach, while the furious assault of the orc captain is weathered by the shielding dwarf in the doorway.
No, I don't think so.
At this stage of the battle in the mines, the goblins have taken enough casualties to become broken, That means that each model will have to take a courage check before moving or run away. The same has happened to the dwarves in the forges.
Keep together. Cut them down.
Kill them.
Rolling for initiative, we've got the forges, where it goes to the orcs, and the mines, where it goes to the dwarves. In the forges, the orcs and troll pile in on the surrounded dwarves, while the orc captain shouts orders from the sidelines.
Maggots. Kill them.
After felling his opponent at the lower doorway, the defending orc warrior rushes out to attack the Oathsworn moving towards the centre.
Get back here.
The Oathsworn not in combat are required to make courage checks, which they automatically pass. That's because they are sworn bodyguards and will only run if Baridoc is slain or falls back. The one at the upper doorway is too far away to help the dwarf in the open, so he'll continue fighting in the doorway. The dwarves in the mine continue pushing on the right flank,
We've got them now. Get stuck in.
but the spear dwarves on the left pull back to avoid overextending.
Beards, stick together.
Forgren continues leading the flanking group and charges at the orc archers. The goblin captain sees the goblin lines beginning to waver and bullies his subordinates back into line, maintaining order for the time being. All friendly models within 6 inches of him count as having passed their check. The orc captain bellows at his fellows and the officers, maintaining their fighting spirit, for now at least. The only model to escape the gaze of his superiors is the orc archer behind the minecart, who takes one look at the approaching dwarves and revenants, decides discretion is the better part of valour, and discreetly buggers off. The orcs commit once more, and the rest of the goblin warband charges into the dwarves, the captain remaining behind to maintain discipline. The goblin archers bravely scurry forward under the glare of the captain to reinforce the thin goblin right flank. The goblin archers once more drop some bows on the Oathsworn in combat with an archer, but again their shots are wide. Pesky morality. The troll focuses his ire on a single stout-heart archer and crumples the poor dwarf within his mail. The orc and goblin assault is ferocious and the dwarf pocket begins to compress. But the remaining Oathsworn fells another orc with his hammer, and Baridoc drives back his shielding opponent, but fails to secure the kill. The Oathsworn in the entry hall turns at the sound of the heavily armoured orc rushing up behind him, shield high, and thrusts his sword low. The orc's momentum drives the dwarf's sword through its armour, and it collapses in a groaning, bloody heap. The struggle in the upper doorway continues, the orc still managing to hold its ground. The press in the mines carries on, neither side gaining any advantage on the dwarf left. The troll scoops its arms over the barricade in front of it, dragging a screaming Stoutheart back to be munched upon. The dwarf right is pressed surprisingly hard, with a spear dwarf falling to goblin spears. The orcs and the officers continue to be trapped, the revenant holding firm, and the South Pass soldier continuing to weather the storm of strikes from the orc captain. Forgren swings towards the orc archer, who, in a rare display of agility, ducks back and avoids Forgren's strikes. The orcs and goblins had the advantage in the silver mines this round, with 2 dwarves falling and only 1 orc being lost to morale. In the forges, the dwarves have lost another Stoutheart and are only 3 models away from routing, while the orcs have lost 2 and are now 3 models away from breaking, which at this stage is the dwarves' only hope. Let's do the next priority roll. For the forges, it's going to go to the dwarves, and for the mines, it's going to go to the dwarves as well. The final Stoutheart in the forges charges in to tie up the troll, while Baridoc and the Oathsworn push hard for the banner and orc captain. Those in the entry hall continue trying to make their way into the forges proper. The remaining orcs who are free close in on the stricken dwarves. Whoops, better make some morale checks for being broken. The Stoutheart passes no worries, as does Baridoc, with the Oathsworn then passing automatically. Over in the mines, the dwarves push up, maintaining their front line. and Forgren and his flankers, that's flankers with an F, pile into the Orc archer. The Orc captain now makes a courage check for being broken. With a courage of 3, he needs 7s, and a 6 will not do it. So we guess he flees through a crack in the ceiling. One of the Orcs bravely holds his ground, while the second follows his captain. The remaining Orc will let out a cry and charge the Dwarf soldier in the doorway. The Goblin captain holds his nerve, and his bellowing keeps his minions in line.
Fighting!
The Troll reaches back across the barricade, while one archer heads off to help hold the flank. The rest of the Goblins are pretty well tied up. The Goblins and the Forgers let loose another volley at the Oathsworn fighting the archer, with one of the arrows hitting, but unfortunately it glances off the Dwarf's armour. Baridoc leaps into the fray, but once more the two Orcs outmaneuver him and he's forced back, their blows clattering off his shield. The Oathsworn beside him drives back the banner bearer, but is unable to land a decisive blow, while the next in line lands his axe with a sickening thud. The Troll continues to maul through archers, his long claws easily raking through dwarven mail, and the Oathsworn in the doorway is pushed back once more. In the mines, Forgren leads the charge, his soldier distracting the Orc long enough for him to land a cleaving blow. The remaining Orc in the offices desperately launches itself at the Dwarf soldier in the doorway, overwhelming him and spilling out into the mines. For the most part, the Dwarves continue to drive the Goblins back. Hanaturm clears a path to the Goblin captain, and the soldier fighting the Troll drives it off with quick slashes from his sword.
Off with you ugly bugger.
Mixed results on the Dwarf left flank. The spear Dwarves kill those Goblins before them, while the Dwarf soldier is cut down by Goblin spears. Things look really bad for the Goblins in the mines. 4 more casualties and their force will rout. 3 more casualties to the Dwarves will cause them to become broken. It's the opposite in the Forges. The Dwarves will rout if they take 2 more casualties, while the Orcs and Goblins will become broken if they lose 2. This is your priority for the next turn. The Forges are going to go to the Dwarves, and the Mines will go to the Dwarves as well. Baridoc begins by making a courage test for being broken. With courage 6, he needs 4 or more and easily passes, and the Oathsworn pass as bodyguards.
Down, Oathsworn.
So the remaining Dwarves spread out, determined to hold a perimeter and avoid becoming trapped. The last Oathsworn by the doorway moves towards the centre, to avoid becoming pinched in the doorway by the Orc coming up from the bottom. The doorway Orcs rush that Dwarf from either side, and the remaining unengaged Orc in the Forges attacks the Oathsworn banner bearer. The Goblins move in to support their own Orcish banner, with the last moving forward as moral support. In the mines, Hanaturm rushes the Goblin captain, distracting it from rallying its troops, and the Dwarves slowly move up, deliberately holding back a little so the Goblins, and especially that Troll, have time to consider their situation.
Watch out, we're coming for you.
The Dwarf soldier at the top moves to block the Orc soldier who stepped through the doorway, but not forcing the fight. And Forgren's flanking force hits the Goblin rear.
Slaughter them.
The Goblin movement phase begins with a whole bunch of courage checks. With a courage value of 2, the unengaged Goblins will need to roll 8 or higher to stick around. And the Troll with courage 3 will need 7 or more. An 8 will pass. Bugger! Well, all in all, they were surprisingly brave. The final model to check will be the Orc soldier from the officers, who easily passes, requiring 8s. They lost 3 models in total, so no routing yet. They can still pose an issue. The remaining models now pile in. The Goblin Archer takes a moment to breathe. Time slows down. A trickle of sweat runs down his forehead. A powerful draw and smooth release in one movement. The arrow bends, compressing, then launches off the string, twisting and bowing. It sails towards the troll, passing between the gangly, grotesque green fingers of its swiping backhand, rough fletchings drawing a line of black blood. Crack! The oath-sworn dwarf's eye opens wide in surprise, his head snapping back. A quivering shaft fills his half-blinded vision as his axe and shield fall. He teeters a moment before falling backward, thudding into the carved stone floor with a loud, metallic clang. The goblin's eyes are wide in that same look of surprise, before his mouth twists into a manic grin, and the sound of battle once more fills his ears. A crazed goblin assault drives the oath-sworn away from the orcish banner, shield held defensively before him. Baridoc lunges once more towards the orc captain, carving the throat from the orc warrior beside him with a sword of star silver, and driving the captain into the wall with his shield. The oath-sworn in the archway shoves his orc warrior clear, while the oath-sworn banner-bearer is forced to give ground before his attacker. The oath-sworn in the entry hall pushes his attackers back with loud shouts and impressive shield skill.
Bastards. I'm no free meal.
Hanatum makes a play for the goblin captain in the mines, but the goblin captain is a fearsome opponent. Its great axe swings unerringly towards Hanatum, but at the last second, loose rock rolls beneath Hanatum's feet, and the axe misses by a hair as he stumbles back. Fate has something else in store for Hanatum. Elsewhere, the fighting is bitter. The goblins take the worst of it, only felling a single dwarf at the cost of 3 goblins. Orgrin is beaten back by a lowly goblin archer. The shame! And the final orc soldier desperately leaps at the South Pass dwarf before him, but the South Pass soldier holds firm and cuts the orc down with his axe. In the silver mines, the casualties have piled up, and the bullion of their captain can no longer keep the goblins in the fight. They rout from the battlefield, the dwarves maintaining order and gaining a major victory. In the forges, the fight is increasingly desperate. The dwarves are 1 model away from routing, while the orcs are 1 model away from being broken. If the dwarves' armour and courage hold out, they may yet claw a minor victory from this struggle, though that possibility seems remote at best.
Let's get out of here. Run away. Run away. Don't come back.
Let's roll some priority for the forges. It goes to the orcs. The orcs quickly surround the wavering dwarves, the troll bearing down on the banner bearer,
We've got them now.
a goblin being
Crush
bullied in to
them.
feed Baridoc, and the orcish banner falling back to a more secure position. The troll reaches out and guts the oath-sworn banner bearer, the dragon banner falling to the floor. 2 goblins and an orc wail on the oath-sworn next to Baridoc, whose armour saves him from anything more than bruising. And Baridoc cuts the goblin before him in 2 with the sword of star silver.
Get out of it.
The oath-sworn in the archway falls to the orc warriors hammering blows, and the 2 orcs in the entry hall swing wildly at the remaining oath-sworn, who ducks and weaves his way out of
We
harm.
must leave. We cannot do any more.
And with that, the dwarves are routed.
Pull back.
They did manage to break the orc force, which means that the dwarves suffer a minor defeat in the forges. So, Baridoc, having been broken and fled, is going to have to roll on a Legendary Heroes and Death chart in Oathbreakers. So, rolling a d10, a 7. He managed to escape with flesh wounds. Though likely sore, he'll be available to fight in the next battle as usual. I was kind of hoping for captured, but that's even better. That was a bit different than the normal format. I hope you enjoyed it. I think in the forges, the Goblin Archers were the MVPs. They were lucky enough to get a couple of early casualties on the Dwarves, and I don't think the Dwarves ever really recovered from that. They got lucky with a couple of heroic moves which allowed them to push deeper into the forges, but ultimately I just don't think they had the models in the right place at the right time to be successful. The battle in the mines had a couple of very cool elements going on in it. The orcs were able to hold the dwarves on the flank through the offices and the breach for a reasonable amount of time, and if it wasn't for Forgrin, I don't think the dwarves would have actually managed to get through. But once Forgrin managed to push his way through the breach, the dwarves were inevitable, really. The weight of goblin numbers on the dwarf right almost succeeded in breaking through their lines, and the dwarf spear wall was just a meat grinder. But ultimately the dwarves were able to hold, and the goblins just ran out of steam. I do love the way the battles played out with that set of rules, though it does take a long time to play them, so maybe I should look at simplifying them. Anyway, the dwarves have successfully secured the precious metal mines, and the forges are currently occupied. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope that you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought of it down below, and we'll see you next time. Cheers!